No dig gardening and building good soil. What's it all about? Now, over recent years we've heard a lot about no dig gardening, and it's one of them sort of subjects where people sort of think it's like one of these fringiest movements. You know, it's not a traditional gardening sort of concept. However, it is an ecological one, and I have been experimenting with the whole idea of just adding to soil and allowing nature to do the work. Now, a few things I want to say is topsoil is a living resource. It takes millions and millions of years for the erosive processes of rocks and combine with organic decomposing material to create topsoil. People just don't realise how important topsoil is. But you know, in order to maintain decent soil, you have to recognise that soil is a living organism. So I was reading a very interesting book, and it was telling me that within any acre of pasture land, you can have up to 2 tons of organic matter beneath your feet. And it's the combination of organic matter and the symbiosis between fungi and bacteria and microbes and microscopic creatures which actually work with the plants for optimum growth. People hear about mycorrhizal fungi. Well, you know, it's quite actually relatively a recent concept that people put mycorrhizal fungi. We're just starting to realise and understand just how important the small symbiosis of small microscopic life in the soil actually directly benefits plants. Now, in healthy soil, you will generally get 3 components. The first is nitrogen, the second is phosphorus, and the third is potash. You know, now in nature, these 3 nutrients would basically be found in the soil from a variation of different scenarios. You would have very, very deep-rooted perennials, which would bring nutrients up from very, very far down in the ground and move them into the ground, the surrounding ground, and the microbiotic systems within them. Nitrogen would be put back into the soil for a process of animals manuring and dying back into the ground, and you'd also get phosphorus from the droppings from birds. So any piece of ground would have a natural occurrence of these 3 nutrients. Now, in modern agriculture, these are artificially made with oil. The nitrates, phosphates and potashes all come from fossil fuels. So what we have in effect is a way to grow mass amounts of crops in a very unsustainable way without oil. A lot of people think when it runs out, we simply solve the problem by having alternative sources of energy. Well, that's fine, but we're not going to be able to farm in the same way. And this is what a lot of people don't realise when it comes to sustainable agriculture and growing food for the future of the world. So how do we maintain and build good soil? Well, to be absolutely frank with you, you need more naturalistic planting schemes. You need more diversity. You need plants which will put nitrogen into the soil, like nitrogen fixing trees in some of the big agroforest projects, Italian alders, Siberian pea trees. These sorts of plants will put nitrogen, capture them from the air and put them back into the soil. I did a video about green manures in terms of growing peas and beans also. This is another way to add nitrogen to the soil. You know, another way you can build good soil is to have plants which tap down deep into the soil's base, deeper down into the soil structure, much deeper down than trees. Things like comfrey, which can reach right down, you know, up to 5 meters or more, and bring nutrients up to the surface which would otherwise be locked down in the ground. Now, if you think of any natural system, a woodland or any wild environment, the recycling would be done via a series of natural processes. So for instance, we're in the forest garden here, and the concept I use is basically a series of mulches shredding up recycled material, laying cardboard under the ground and applying dead plant matter. It can look a little bit messy sometimes, but what I'm actually trying to do is encourage the small soil life to decompose the ground. And in a minute I'll show you, I'll have this forest garden is about a year old, and I will dig down onto the top layers and I will show you what the soil is like underneath. This was all lawn since the 1970s here, and it's just basically been cut, constantly machine cut. And within a year I will show you the sort of results that I've got just by applying mulches to the soil. If you think of a natural woodland, what will usually happen is trees will die, they will fall over, plants and animals will live and die. The fall, autumn time will come, leaves will hit the ground. A lot of the natural life in soil that rely on this natural process has pretty much died out in a lot of areas, and I think this is why it takes a little bit of time, and it is sometimes worth putting some mycorrhizal fungi into the ground when trying to establish a forest system or a new gardening bed. Now, we're always going to have typical vegetable plots, but it is important to try and add more matter to the top of soil. Every time you dig soil, you're releasing carbon into the atmosphere, and you're actually, sunlight is hurting the small systems within the soil. And we're actually learning about this in science more and more as time goes on. So what I would recommend is, if you have a typical vegetable plot, try and add organic matter every year. If you're not going to have any other plants, nitrogen fixing plants, try and use your crop rotation, your beans, so that you're constantly aware of putting more nitrogen into the soil so you don't have to dig as much. But in terms of flowering beds, what I like to do is I like food systems which actually look good as well. So here I've got my wood cutting area where there's a lot of just by default you get a lot of wood chippings from when I'm chopping the wood and cutting the wood, but that blends into the forest garden edge. It's not big enough, what I would say, to be a forest garden. It's a forest garden edge, trying to capture the sun's level at different heights. So what I've tried to incorporate here is a series of mulching, symbiotic plants, and already the fungi life is quite amazing. There's quite a lot of fungi already, signs of flowering, and I've actually tried to incorporate my own wine cap fungus into the ground, but so far I haven't had any luck. But sometimes you've just got to accept it's going to do its own thing. So no dig gardening, it has its place. Give it a go. I mean, some of the vegetable beds I did over there, I didn't dig the ground before. I was criticised for this by my neighbour. You know, he said, you know, you're not digging the soil, and you're just putting compost on top. But you know, it worked. What can I say? I was short for time, and it did work. I've grown some very good vegetables. Where I am here, it's top of a hill, and it's a very thin layer of soil. The soil's not bad, but it's quite stony. And I'm already finding very interesting, very good results from just adding mulch to the top of the soil. So I'm just going to show you a little bit of what I've been doing here. So I don't know if you can actually see this here, but this is the wood chips. I invested in some wood chips, you know, just to get the whole thing started, but I mean, the further you get down, the soil has become really black. You know, it's starting to mix in all of that carbon and nitrogen is starting to get in there, and you know, you have a very good area free of weeds. So give it a go, experiment, try mulching a few beds, try growing a few different nitrogen fixing plants, and see how you get on.